Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of gouletpens.com for episode number 255 of Goulet Q&A. Today I'm going to be talking about why nice pens are so large, if pens appreciate like art does, and do I actually believe in the products that we carry here? We're going to get into all that here today. We had a Memorial Day weekend this past weekend, so we were off on Monday celebrating all of our fallen veterans and active duty servicemen and women. So thank you to all of you who are serving our country, not just in the US, but around the world. It's a very noble thing to be able to do, and it allows me to sit here and talk about pens without having to worry about the outside world too much. Launched some new things, talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, so I won't get into it too much, but we have the Herbert Belladonna that we launched. Very exciting collaboration that we have with our local pen maker, Chet Herbert. So we're excited for that. We're going to start to sell out of those a little bit probably, but then we're going to be restocking and keep a regular replenishment. Got 300 of those pens overall. I'm thinking they're going to last several months. So if you're missing out right at this moment, don't freak out too much. We're going to have more, but you can only get them here. And then we have the TWSBI 580 ALR Purple, which I realize I think I still have in my bag. Very cool pen. They all sold out the day that we launched them. There we go. Boom. Talked about that a little bit last week in Right Now. And I figured they would probably sell out, and they did, but hopefully we're going to restock them in about 2 weeks. So it won't be too long of a wait there. What else we got? We're stocking up on more 30 milliliter Monteverde ink. I don't know if that matters to you too much, but we're trying to offer different volume sizes, leaning more towards the 30 mil, so that's cool. Also got some Esterbrook pen nooks. They're pen cases, and they're pretty interesting, so we got those in this week. If you're looking for pen storage option, it's got a really cool interior that looks pretty neat, so check out pictures of that on our site. And then we have a new pen, the Stipula Rainbow Tocopherro, which I actually have right over here. I'm hoping that we actually end up launching them today when this video goes live, but if not, it'll be shortly thereafter. Rachel and I showed it in Q&A on Wednesday, but I'll give you a brief little view here. This is a pen, I believe it's a brass substrate. I'm trying to get confirmation on that, but it is a PVD coating, which is physical vapor deposition. Don't exactly know what that means scientifically, but basically it's a coating process. It's different than electroplating, but somewhere in that vein, and it gives this really colorful, vibrant coating. It's actually quite durable as well on this really cool pen. Piston filling pen, has rose gold plated accents, rose gold plated stainless steel nib. Very, very unique looking pen, and this is an exclusive that we worked up. Fruits of our labor from our trip that we took there last September. So seeing some of that come to fruition now between the, what is it, the Etruria, which, where is my Etruria? I think I have it. Maybe that's in my case too. Anyway, we had the Etruria Alter Ego. That came out of that trip. Boom, that sucker. We still have a bunch of these, though not infinite. And then we have the Tocopherro, which has just come out. So that's kind of neat. And then, you know, other small bits and pieces here and there. But I wanted to get right into the questions this week, so I didn't want to go too deep into any of these things. So let me start off on pen and writing questions. This is from, that might be the fastest intro I've ever done in Q&A, by the way. Pen and writing questions. Starting out from Pooja C on Facebook. Why are luxury pens so large? I have very small hands. Pilot Stargazer is my ideal size. I want to try high-end pens with luxury materials like a 18 and 21 karat nibs, but cannot as they are not available in smaller sizes. Why doesn't the industry cater towards people with smaller hands? Okay, a couple different questions there. First thing I want to touch on a little bit is the idea of like luxury materials like 18 and 21 karat nibs. You know, you can have luxury pens without having to have those specific nibs. You can have really nice writing 14 karat nibs that you actually like better than 18 and 21 karat. This whole thing of like it has to be a higher karat gold to be more of a luxury thing, bit of a misnomer. So yes, there are nice pens that have those nibs on them. I'm not saying that's not a factor, but that in and of itself doesn't necessarily work as a cutoff for what's considered luxury and not, at least in my mind. But you may have a different thing in mind. That said, I have a lot of pens I'm going to talk about that are not 18 and 21 karat. In fact, Sailor, I think, is the only one that has a 21 karat nib. So you're really talking pretty narrowly there if you're talking about that. So get into some other things. So they don't necessarily have to be, so large, getting back to your original question. But I think they tend to go a little bit large for a couple different reasons. First off, I want to talk about the stargazer, because we used to have the stargazer here, and now we don't. And it's unfortunate because I actually really love that pen. It wrote really well. The cap on it was it was such a smooth capping action. Really loved it. But the bottom line is it just wasn't very popular here. Like, we carried it for, I want to say, a year and a half, 2 years that Pilot had it in the US. They ended up discontinuing it in the whole US. It wasn't like we didn't like it, so we dropped it, but it didn't sell super great. And then it went away, and you're one of the select few that probably even remembers that pen. Just not a ton of people were super into it, and I don't know why, to be quite honest with you, because it is a great pen. I think a lot of people have found it to be too small. And I think that there's a couple different factors as to why pens end up being kind of larger, especially in this space. And one of them is that when you're using really nice materials, or maybe you have artwork or some kind of intricate pattern or something like that, it tends to just be more flattering on a larger canvas. So when you're talking about luxury pens, you're talking about using pens kind of as artwork, and that art has a canvas, which in the pen's situation is, the body of the pen. So I think that a lot of times, at least I know specifically with Namiki, they will have the most expensive and most elaborate of the pens are on the largest Emperor pen bodies, because it's a larger canvas and it takes more time, and there's more artwork and there's more to work with. You can tell more of a story on the pen. That's why they end up being so big. Smaller pen, smaller size, you can't see as much of it. It's not as flattering. If you have a material, you can't make it as thick. You can't show as much of it, so you just see a little less depth and things like that when you have, translucence and these types of things. So I think that in general, manufacturers tend to like to make them a little bit bigger because it shows off a little bit more. It looks a little more impressive. Your stargazer, it's a lacquered surface, so that type of situation doesn't matter quite as much, but it certainly can matter more on some other pens. And then I think there's a perception, especially in the US and definitely other parts of the world, where size and specifically weight mean it's worth more, or there's a higher perceived value of something that has a good weight to it. And I know this is very different in other parts of the world, but I think that's largely kind of how things go in the US. Is people, when you have something bigger, more impressive, more vibrant, more shinier, more intricate, heavier, it just feels more quality, feels like it's worth more, feels more luxury in general. So that it definitely is a perception thing. Yeah. And then looking specifically at like thinner pens, my experience has been when I traveled to Japan, there were more thin pen options there. I don't know if that's just a universal thing, and a lot of lighter pens too. I think the Japanese especially tend to value lighter pens more than in the US. It's almost kind of opposite. They view like lighter pens as being higher quality. Specifically talking about the nibs, because I think the nibs are a big factor. In order for nibs to really feel kind of luxury, have that bouncy, kind of springy, maybe a little bit of flex, that kind of thing. Just physically, in order to make that happen, the easiest and maybe the best, the larger the nib you have, the more leverage you have to work with that springiness and that bounce. The more the material is kind of working for you there, the more material you have to work with on that nib. So I think that you tend to have somewhat of a more luxurious feel on the pen, super generalizing here. When you have a larger nib, then you have a larger nib, thus it needs a larger grip, it needs a larger body, it needs a larger kind of everything to accommodate that nib. So you can only take a huge nib and cram it onto so small of a body, and by the time you get a really larger nib, and there's an appeal, there's a mental thing when you have a big nib, it looks really impressive. Think about the Mont Blanc 149, the Pelican M1000, Namiki Emperor, these types of things. They have big nibs and they seem like the most luxurious, perhaps, argued by some. And those are all really big pens, because you have to have a big pen to accommodate a really big nib like that. So I think that is probably a bit of a factor. It could be, maybe tradition or manufacturing bias. I'm not sure if that. There's probably an element of supply and demand. Honestly, I think that, like the Stargazer, they try to sell it. It doesn't sell so well. They come up with another pen. It sells better, so they make that. They look at what sells more, so they make more of what sells better. And just over time, you end up with kind of the offering that's out there, which is skewed more towards larger pens, perhaps. But that said, I didn't want to leave you hanging. So I thought, what are some pens that I think are better for people with smaller hands? So I picked a few that are more in that luxurious kind of category. Maybe not in the 18 karat, because actually there's not that many pens that have 18 karat nibs these days. And most of the times you can't tell the difference between 18 and 14, really. Maybe you can if it's a very, very slight difference. But I mean, thinking about specifically pens that have a 14 and an 18 karat nib option, like, certain Auroras and things like that, it's very, like, I'm trying to find a difference, and I'm like, I think maybe I feel a little more bounce, but in all practicality, I'm like, no, like, it's just not. And you might pay $100 more for an 18 karat nib on pens like that. And I'm like, you can say you have an 18 karat nib, but is that really better? It doesn't really look any different. It doesn't, I don't know. That's up to you. It's totally up to you. But for me, I don't think that needs to be. I mean, certainly when you get to a gold nib, that can change things. So just going to gold in the first place, to me, would be a little bit more of the cutoff, because there's so many more 14 karat nib options, because the price of gold and stuff like that being what it is, that's just mostly what you see. So I went through and I picked a bunch of what I thought were good smaller pen options, and I'll even give you some steel nib ones, just because what the heck, I wanted to give you some small options, so I'm gonna do that. Starting out, we've got Pelikan. Okay, so Pelikan has a few different small options. You've got your these are M200, M120. These are steel nibs, so they may not fall into your classification here, but I think for a lot of people they would be considered kind of more luxury pens. But the M400 is where it gets to a gold nib, and that's really where I would definitely consider it. There's an M300 too. They don't have that many of those though. But the M400 is the exact same body size as the M200. That's really why I wanted to show this, just because you'd get a sense of it. And my hands are really big, so I'm going to make the pens look really small. But there you go. That's the idea of kind of what it looks like. Okay, and then you could even go up to an M600. I think that would be kind of the upper limit of what would be comfortable somebody with really small hands, but it still would be comfortable. My wife has smaller hands, not tiny hands, but smaller hands than me, certainly. She loves the M600. A lot of people do. So I think, especially when they come out with special editions like the purple, you could certainly take a look at that one. The Miki has the Nippon Art, which is like their kind of entry-level Maki. And I think that one, granted the length of the pen is a little bit longer, but the grip of it is nice. The weight of it is not too heavy. And I think that it's going to be a nicer pen for smaller hands. Certainly gets into that luxury category. So that one's worth a look. Lamy has the CP1, and if you really want luxury, you can get the CP1 Platinum, which has a 14 karat gold nib, and the whole pen is plated in platinum, so it looks pretty blingy, looks pretty luxurious. It's a very, very thin pen. The CP1 in general, there's a black version that's got a steel nib, it's much cheaper. This one is well over $200, and really cool looking pen, very shiny. Tracks a lot of fingerprints though, that's the only thing. So you'll have luxurious fingerprints all over your pen. But still, really cool pen that I think would be worth consideration. You mentioned that you like your Stargazer. Another really good smaller Pilot one that's still around is the Pilot E95S. Really cool capping mechanism. I love the feel of it. Very short pen, okay? And it's got a tapered grip, so you can kind of grip it closer if you want to, have a really small grip section. Just slides right onto the back there, so easy to extend it, or you can use it unposted like so. Really good pen, 14 karat nib, got a nice bounce to this one. This is bouncier and springier than most 18 karat nibs, for what it's worth. That's a 14 karat nib, but it's bouncier. And then this is a Pilot that we don't have here in the US, but this is one called the Grance. I think it's called Grance. Grance. I don't exactly know how to pronounce it even, because it's not something we have, so I can really get an answer to that. But I got this in Japan, this particular color scheme, is pretty cool. It's a 14 karat nib on this one, but it's a thinner pen as well. I basically bought it because it was blue and the pens were cheaper in Japan over there. So I was able to get it. And plus I'd just never seen it, so it looks pretty cool. So I picked up one of those. You might be able to find some of those around out there on the internet land, but could be something worth investigating for you, especially if you're traveling or if you happen to be international. And then keeping with Pilot, one more is the Decimo. Okay, so the vanishing point's a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier. The Decimo is lighter, and you can still get that same 18 karat nib. It does have an 18 karat nib, which is pretty cool. Not super bouncy or anything. This would be one of those examples of, yes, it has an 18 karat nib, but it's going to feel, you know, the nib is really short. If you take the nib out of the vanishing point or the Decimo, it's not super bouncy. I mean, it's basically from the point where the nib is hitched to the feed. It's only maybe half an inch, so it's pretty short. Not a ton of movement going on there, which is fine. Still a smooth writing pen. Great pen. Love this one. Rachel's a big fan of VP and the Decimo in general. Nice size for smaller hands. QOTW has one called the Lilliput, which is a steel nib, so I don't know if this would be considered luxury to you. This is pushing $200 though, so I would kind of put it up there with the best of them. And this is the Fire Blue, which is a really cool color. Looks really neat. Looks, I don't know if you'd consider luxury or more rugged or whatever, but there's a brass version, there's a copper version. Kind of interesting and not your everyday pen. Very, very small. I mean, I think this is the smallest of the bunch. Very thin. Only takes cartridges, which is the only thing I don't really love about this pen, but looks pretty rad. And then another one that I don't have, but to sell at least, but Rachel's got one of these. This is a Mont Blanc Bohème, which is a pretty cool little pen. You know, it's got this nice little jewel in the clip here, but it's a kind of like a safety pen. So the nib is actually retracted into, it's not technically actually a safety pen because it's a normal safety pen like the Noodler's Boston safety pen. The nib is actually completely submerged in ink. That's not the case with this one. This is a cartridge pen, which actually you just kind of unhinge the back, and then you can twist it. How do you get this thing out of here? I can't remember. Twist it. There we go. And then your cartridge can pop in and out. Oh, this is still inked. Oh gosh. Rachel probably needs me to clean this for her. Anyway, so it's cartridge only, but the cartridge loads in there. You cap it, and then the nib is retractable. Pretty cool. And then it's got a little post inside of there, so you can't actually like jam the nib into there. You still don't want to jam it, but it's got a little post, and it keeps you from jamming the nib in there completely. So that's kind of cool. Very much a pocket style pen, very small. I would consider that to be in that luxurious small hand category for sure. But we don't sell that, but you can find it around, I'm sure. So that's kind of what I got. Hopefully that helps you out, answer some questions for large pens. Okay, Mackenzie H on Facebook says, heading into summer always makes me think about vacations and traveling. The Goulet name has gotten you the VIP tour at some brands' facilities, but are there any pen locations or experiences that you know of that are available to the average Joe? I'd love to add some pen destinations to my travel bucket list. Okay, so there's a couple that I know of. Not a lot of people are doing tours, but there's a couple. One is Pelikan, if you happen to be in Germany. They give tours. You can book them, and you can actually do a specialty nib grind on a pen that you buy there, and you can watch them grind it, which is pretty cool. Like, that's an interesting experience. Pelikan's the only one I know that does that specifically. So that's pretty cool. I've noticed some people to finagle their way into a Visconti tour, so they're in this like 15th century villa in the heart of Tuscany, right there in Florence. So that setting is going to be fantastic. I don't know that they're like rolling people through there every day. They don't have like bookable tours on their website like Pelikan does. But I have heard of some people that have kind of been able to work their way in there. I imagine there's just probably not all that many people that roll through there all the time, and you can maybe arrange a tour. I don't know. I don't know if it's anything official that they do. I've just heard of a few people that have done it. I know that Aurora has a museum in their place up there in Italy as well, but I don't know 100% for certain if it's open to the public. You probably want to reach out to them and find out. But from what I understand, they have a pretty cool history of pens and history and writing museum that they're really proud of. That's worth taking a look at. And then I've heard that Graf von Faber-Castell gives tours as well, and they're in like a castle basically, which would probably be pretty rad. But again, I don't know if it's like a bookable thing through their website or whatever. So any of these companies that you're looking at or happen to be near, it might be worth reaching out to them. And those are both, I mean, these are all Germany and Italy right here. So you could probably do a German-Italy tour or something like that if you were so inclined. Yeah, I don't know of anybody else that does. I don't know of any of the Japanese companies that do. I mean, the American companies are just few and far between in general. But their manufacturing is kind of spread out everywhere and in very non-notable locations. But these are the only ones that I know that you could get a tour without really some kind of like special connection or like being in the industry. Even being in the industry, it's sometimes difficult to be able to see these places. I think some of it's practicality, some of it's just like trade secrets, safety, security, legality, like that kind of stuff. I'm not one to judge. We don't even have public access into our building as a retailer here. We're strictly online. So I can understand even more so if you're doing manufacturing and there's big machinery and high voltage electricity and like all these kinds of things and really, really expensive, equipment, proprietary equipment, things processes you don't want to see, lots of gold laying everywhere. I can imagine why they would want to keep those buildings locked down pretty well. So I would think it would take a lot of planning and commitment and staffing to accommodate public visits, and most manufacturers frankly aren't set up for that. So I think wherever you go, there's probably like retailers and stuff that you could visit. That's going to be a pretty neat cultural experience. And obviously if it's a brick and mortar setup, they're going to be, not only willing, but hoping that you will come and visit them on your travels. So that's one place, or one thing that I would look to do maybe is visit some of the retailers that happen to be in the local area, especially if they're in Germany, Japan, Italy, France, UK. You'll have more, pen store options traveling in those places than most other countries probably. So there you go. All right, Dave Miner on Instagram says, do you prefer a canvas style Rickshaw pen sleeve or a leather sleeve for your everyday carry pen? I think they're both great options. I'm a big fan personally of the single sleeve pen carry because I've been doing it myself for years and years and years. I also carry around like a 12 pen case or sometimes a 6 pen or 10 pen or 20 pen or whatever. Like I carry multiple pen cases around in my backpack, but I'm kind of unusual. I'm like in the business, right? So of course I would carry more stuff. But that said, if I really had to boil it down, I mean, I love the Rickshaw sleeves. The patterns are awesome. You can get them highly personalized. Like the Belladonna here, it matches the pen. That's really cool. Leather is going to pretty much be what it is. But that said, I've been carrying this leather slip for 8 years or so, this specific one. I mean, you can just tell how worn it is because I have one. Granted, this is a different color, but I have a new one compared to the one that I've been carrying around for years. And just to see the wear and tear and the stories this leather could tell from the conversations it's overheard in my pocket. Or the times I've mowed the lawn with it in my pocket. That's pretty cool. Like leather's gonna wear, it's gonna last a really long time, and it's got some character to it of its own. So it really just kind of comes down to personal preference. I would definitely consider carrying both myself personally, but I gotta make a choice, and so it would be leather for me. Okay. Mike Puckett on Instagram says, I'm currently in the stage of the hobby where I'm shifting from acquiring a mass of pens and inks into finding pens or inks I really love, and stepping into my next level pens, 2000, Vanishing Point, 3776. I'd really love to try an Architect nib. What are your thoughts on having a Goulet or other number 6 nib, broad nib ground into an Architect versus having the grind done on a pricier nib, like a Lamy 2000 double broad? My thought is that with a general number 6, I could swap it into a variety of pens rather than just having one pen with the Architect. Is that nuts? Mike, no, I don't think that's nuts at all. I think, like most things, there's a fine line between being crazy and being a genius. And I think in this case, you might actually be a genius. No, I think the tendency is, okay, I'm paying for this grind. You might pay $30, $40, $50 for a custom grind like this Architect. Do I really want to pay a $50 grind on a $15 nib? You know what I mean? So of course you're thinking a little bit of sunk cost bias. It's more about like, well, if I'm going to spend more on this thing, I should use it on a pen that I've already spent more on. Well, it depends on what you're going to use it for. I think that Architect nibs aren't ones that particularly benefit from the aspects that a gold nib provides per se. You know, gold nibs typically have a little bit of bounce, maybe a little bit of flexibility to them. That's really not what you want with an Architect nib. You want it to be a very fine line. So for those of you who've never seen what I'm talking about, Architect nib is ground. They basically grind the sides of a really broad nib, so it ends up being kind of like a blade. If you think about your normal stub as kind of this flat one, and it's got a very thin cross stroke and a very thick downstroke. That's pretty common. A lot of pen companies have that. A lot fewer of them have an Architect grind. It's a little bit more technical. It's harder to grind. It's harder to do. It requires a lot of handwork. So there's not any pen company that I'm aware of that offers an Architect grind from the factory. Okay, so you have to get it custom. So they grind the sides, so you end up with a very thin downstroke and a thicker cross stroke. And you have to hold your pen at a very specific angle to be able to make that happen. And you can't really put a lot of pressure, you can't really get a lot of bounce and stuff like that. So in terms of having a really expensive pen and having a nib that really you'd see a lot of benefit of having some of that softness and wetness and these types of things, that's not particularly in and of itself to an advantage with an Architect nib. You want proper flow, and you want it to be a nib that's going to last a long time and these types of things. So you should take that into account. But a really good steel nib, like a Jowo steel, is going to be, I think, worthy of a nib grind like this. You know, if you know you love the Lamy 2000, you love that pen, you love everything about it, you want to use it all the time, sure, like consider getting the Architect grind on that. You know, but I don't think there's anything wrong with getting it ground on a steel nib that you can swap in between other pens. Then you can carry other pens around. You can use your Architect as you want in a bigger variety of ways. I think that's kind of smart. So I like your strategy. I think it's kind of cool, honestly. Like, I have a Lamy 2000 that I had Mark Bacchus grind into an Architect from nibgrinder.com. And it's cool, but I know that if I want to use an Architect nib, I've got to ink up that pen. And maybe I don't always want to carry around a Lamy 2000 for whatever reason. Or if I want to change colors a lot, and I'm like, it's a piston filler, it takes a little bit more work to clean that out. Dang, okay. Whereas I've, since had nib training, and I've ground a bunch of my own Architects that I've used on Goulet nibs, shockingly. I put on all kinds of pens. Some are cartridge converter, and it's easier to swap out the ink and stuff like that in them. And so there's pros and cons kind of doing it every way. So just be thoughtful about it. It just sounds like you are. But yeah. And I have no affiliation towards Mark Bacchus per se with Architect grinds and stuff like that. I just think he does a good job, and I've had him do some of mine. So I would highly recommend him. But there's other good nibmeisters out there that do Architects too. And most of them, they'll put on their website if they do Architects. I've never really heard of any nibmeister that people have complained about their Architects. I think they will only offer it if they kind of know what they're doing. And it's kind of a technical grind, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to do. I find that like triple extra fines, quadruple extra fines are more difficult than Architects. Yeah, so there you go. Hope that's helpful. All right, pnwnaturenerd on Instagram. pnwnaturenerd. I'm trying to figure if that is an acronym or what. Anyway, pnwnaturenerd on Instagram. In your opinion, is collecting rare and valuable pens a sound addition to an investment strategy? Do pens tend to appreciate over time like art? So I'm going to latch on to one word that you asked in this question, which is sound. No, I would not consider them to be a sound addition to an investment strategy. Without getting too much into microeconomics here, I would say that like any other collectible niche kind of art realm, it's not really going to be considered sound because not everybody's into it. So you're going to be subject to ebbs and flows and whims and the fancies of whatever community of people is collecting these things, which is going to change over time, and it's not going to happen in a very predictable way per se. It's also not going to happen across the board. So you could have some pens that triple in price because they just really become popular for whatever reason, and you're going to have other pens that don't really do much or are actually worth less, especially if you ink it up and use it. So I can't say that it's going to be sound. Now, it could be an investment strategy, and like anything else, you can probably pick ones that are going to do better and stuff like that. But in general, it's going to be a little hit or miss. So that's why I can't call it sound. And I've never been a huge fan, personally, of buying pens purely for their investment value. I know that was a huge trend in the 90s and maybe early 2000s with a lot of limited edition pens, a lot of Mont Blancs and things like that were getting into the $1,000, $2,000 range. A lot of people were just, any LE that would come up, they would buy it, sock it away, put it in a safe place like a bank vault or a safe deposit box and that kind of thing, and would just collect them just to hope one day get the payoff. And some of those pens are worth a lot more, and some of them are worth kind of the same. And it's not something that I think like, yeah, you should forego your 401k and buy pens instead. I don't think that's wise. I think if you purely want to talk investments, like, you'd be 100% better off strictly financially just going with like a diversified, safe, relatively financial vehicle, CDs, mutual funds, that kind of thing. I think over time, pens, you're going to see inflation, you're going to see some ups and downs based on, demand. But I think in terms of the broad spectrum, you're probably going to see just a purely better financial investment. Just going with like a low-risk mutual fund over time for the average individual. That said, I'm not a financial advisor or any financial person, so take this purely only for entertainment value. It's not legal advice in any way. That said, not just talking about money, but in terms of value and enjoyment, I think pens are a fantastic investment if you're into pens, because generally speaking, you're going to be able to ultimately probably sell your pens for a decent amount, close to what you bought them at, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on condition, other factors. But it's going to be a place where you can park some of your money, enjoy whatever it is you're using. They're going to last a really long time. You can either pass them on or maybe sell them one day and be able to recoup some of that. Well, not if you pass them on, but you'll be able to recoup some of that if you sell them, and you'll have enjoyed the pens all along the way. I honestly think that's why art as an investment is interesting, right? Is because, yeah, you're investing in something, but if you buy a bunch of mutual funds, what do you have? You have mutual funds. No one cares. But if you have art, ooh, look at my fancy art. I got a Banksy or whatever. That's, you're so cool. And like the enjoyment you'll get out of that is part of the payoff of that investment as well. And then hopefully you can sell it at a value. So, just like any other art, it's not like if you buy any painting, it's going to be worth more. If you buy a Banksy or you buy something that's very notable, that will be worth more. Or obviously now if you buy something from any of the great masters, that will probably appreciate over time. Whereas if you buy like a super rare vintage fountain pen and buy it at the right price, yeah, okay, it might increase in value still, if it's a tried and true and very specific, but there's no guarantee of that. So anyway, it's hard to put a value dollar on like the enjoyment of something that you'll have, like a pen, but that's why I say don't buy it purely on the expectation of investment, but you'll be able to recoup most of it and enjoy the heck out of your pens in the meantime. Cool. All right. Next question is from Supakorn R on Facebook. Is it safe to transfer ink between pens? I've never really been asked this before, and I have a very short answer. I think you're good. like generally speaking. There's always a slight risk that, you could have some contamination issue or something like that. But honestly, if you're starting with two clean, untainted pens, if you will, and you have one that has ink in it, and I'm thinking specifically if you have a cartridge converter pen, like here, I have a cartridge converter pen. This is a Diplomat Aero. Hey, look at that. It's got a converter. I want to clean out this pen. I kind of want to put it away or maybe carry something else. I just bought another pen. I don't really feel like inking it up. I'm just going to pull the converter out of this one, stick it on the back of my other new pen, and roll. There's really nothing wrong with that. As long as the other pen that you're going to use is clean, like, knock yourself out. That's pretty much it. If it's fountain pen ink being used in two fountain pens, and the other one's clean, you can have fun. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at with that one. If you have like a piston filler and you have to empty it out into some kind of container, of course, the more like containers and stuff that you're involving, the more possible contamination you could get into. But a lot of ink has biocides and stuff like that in it. It's really not anything I think you need to sweat very much, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, have fun changing between your pens to your heart's desire. And looks like I'm going to end a little bit early this week. Just rolling right along. I got a personal question to close it out. This is from Glenn M on Facebook. Do you feel like you're giving your stamp of approval, either as a company or personally, to every product you sell? Would you ever sell anything you weren't 100% behind? I feel like I've seen you dance a little at times. Glenn, being honest, calling me out. That's totally cool, What can I say? I was a dance captain in show choir in high school. I don't know how that happened. I'm not that great of a dancer, honestly. I think I just have really long arms, and I wasn't afraid to rock some pretty serious jazz hands and starbursts. So anyway, that's not what you're talking about, though. I know. And I'm not deflecting. You're giving me an honest question here, a couple of them, and you want some honest answers, so I'm going to do that. So our mission statement here at Goulet Pens is to provide fountain pen enthusiasts with the most personal online shopping experience through comprehensive education, exemplary service, and products we believe in, right? So that products we believe in portion is really hitting on what it is that you're talking about here. But what does that mean? That's kind of vague belief. Obviously this pen exists, so I believe that it exists. I believe in it. We should carry it. That's not exactly the heart of what we're talking about here. Believe in means we think that this is something that we would want to put our name behind. This is something that we would entrust in our customers' hands, that we think would be valued in the community, that we want to support in terms of the manufacturer, the distributor, as much as we're able to learn and kind of, put together, we kind of wrap all that up into, do we believe in this? And it's a little vague, I admit, but that's largely kind of what we're talking about. So, for me, there is definitely sometimes a personal preference factor. Obviously, I lean towards like blue things, blue pens and stuff like that. I get a little excited about those. Other people, if there's like a pen that has a lot of glitter in it, or if it's a really big pen, or these types of things, like the personal preference really comes through pretty heavy. I'm trying usually to sort through some of that. Of course, you're going to see when I genuinely get excited about stuff. But there's a lot of products that we carry that I get excited about for you, if that makes sense. Things that maybe aren't 100% my own preference. Like if I wasn't in this business, would I buy as many pens as I have bought now? No, of course not. Like I do that a lot because I want to experience a lot of pens. I want to have a good understanding of what's valuable and meaningful to you all, variety of colors, sizes, filling mechanisms, nib types, all this kind of stuff. Very much case in point, one of the pens that I just don't use very much personally that I've already mentioned here is the QOTW Lilliput, right? It's a very small pen. I've used it a few times and it's basically so small I don't want to write with it personally. But that doesn't mean I don't believe in the product, because I think it's a great product and I think a lot of people really enjoy it. So there are times when you'll see me, I don't know what you consider dancing, but when I'm struggling to come up with the same, excitement and enthusiasm for certain products, just because I'm having to think outside of myself, I guess. When I'm talking about it, because it's not stemming from like my own personal enthusiasm and excitement for said given product. But that doesn't mean I don't believe in it. It just means that it doesn't, it's like sometimes when you look at something, or you see a pen, or you see a car, or you see clothing, or a food item, or whatever it is, and it's just like, whoo, like it just lights up and just fills your brain with dopamine, and you're like, yeah, I dig that. I don't get that with every single pen that we carry. I do get excited about most pens, being quite honest with you. But there are some pens where sometimes I'm like, okay, who likes this pen? Why is this such a good pen? I have to think about it more intellectually, and you'll see my gears turn a little bit more. That is more likely the scenario of probably what's happening in my brain, and why it comes across as a little less authentic is because it's a personal preference bias, I guess, that I have towards some pens and maybe not others, that could be interpreted as stronger belief or support for certain ones than others. Other situations where that could happen is if there's a new product that's very speculative, and I don't have a good gauge for how well it's going to be received in the community or not. Sometimes I get really excited about something and it completely falls flat in the community. And I'm like, dang, okay. And it kind of rocks me a little bit. So then when we launch something else that's kind of similar, I'm kind of like, okay, I really want to get excited about this, but I don't know how it's going to do. There's uncertainty. That I can feel some hesitation towards. Case in point, I've got this pen right here, so I'll talk about it. This is the Monteverde tool pen, right? Not like most other pens that we have. It's a little bit more of a themed pen. It's got rulers on it, a level, a stylus. It's got screwdrivers in the back. It's the only pen that I know that has a screwdriver in it, right? So it's just a different kind of pen. We carried this pen several years ago. It did okay, and then it didn't, so we dropped it. This past holiday season, we were like, you know what? It's been a few years. Let's pick it up for the holidays, see how it does. It did surprisingly well for the holidays. It's a very giftable kind of pen. And I think it does well in its ballpoint version, not as well in the fountain version, for whatever reason. And so that was one situation where it was like, okay, we carried it before. It was kind of popular, and then it died off really heavily. It's been a few years. We have a lot of new customers that have come around in the last 3 years who we can introduce this pen to. It's not that we ever had a problem with it. It's just that, it doesn't take a converter, so it has to have a cartridge. So the hardcore writers that we had, especially years ago, kind of dogged on the pen a little bit. And we're like, what is this thing? It's gimmicky or whatever. But then we carried it again this time, and it was more successful. So we were like, okay. And that was one thing where it was like, I wanted to carry it again to try, but going off past history, I was like, not like everybody needs to have this pen, but I was like, I do believe in it enough to try it again, offer it to people that find it appealing. Could be kind of cool and interesting and new for a lot of people. And it kind of worked in that way. So that can sometimes happen. Or, gosh, I think about flex nibs. Flex nib pens fall into this category across pretty much all brands, because flex nibs all require a little bit of patience, require some persistence, require a little more flexibility on the part of the user. And they're a little harder to troubleshoot. They cause more frustration for my team, quite honestly, because they spend a lot more time troubleshooting. There's some people that just, no matter how hard they try or whatever it is, they just can't get the hang of it. Not even necessarily it's a product defect. It's that it's an instrument, and it is harder to use in its flexible nature than a typical fountain pen. So across all brands, whenever we're talking about but with flex pens, the demand is really high on pretty much all of them. Anytime there's a flex nib that comes out, people are asking about it and talking about it. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of excitement. So we get really excited with some heavy reservation because we know every flex pen we come out with, there's going to be a lot of excitement towards it, and most people, like the vast majority, are going to be very, very happy. But those who are not happy with it are very vocal and speak openly and post pictures, and there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot to kind of talk about around somebody's dissatisfaction with any particular flex pen. So situations like that where there's a bit of risk or a bit of speculation, a bit of uncertainty about how it's going to be perceived out there in the world, that can cause some hesitation on my part, maybe make me dance just a little bit, mainly because I'm trying to frame up the right way to keep up with the excitement of whatever it is, be it a pen material, a finish, a nib size, whatever. But I'm also trying to hedge against somebody who may have misguided expectations, if that's correct. Flex nibs, this is a very, very strong point, which is why we've done like a number of flex nib videos and things like that, trying to educate and set the proper expectation. So it's a little less clear, the exact messaging approach towards that. I think that's the best way to explain it. And the truth is, there's a lot of gray. Nothing is 100%. Kind of talking back to your question as, would you ever sell anything that you weren't 100% behind? Yeah, I've done that because I'm not 100% perfect. So we have sold things here that have been very well received. People love them. They think they're great, the best pens ever. And I'm like, I don't really like this pen at all. It's not my preference. It's not my thing. But dang, people like it and it's very well received. Customers always right, as they say, which, that phrase could be dissected, but we won't get into that. So no one's 100% perfect, including myself. So I don't strive for perfection, even in my own belief about a product when we're going to launch it. So it is something that, no one makes a decision in isolation on the Goulet team about what pen we should carry or continue to carry. So I and my team, we debate, we always run things through this filter of our mission statement, which is the whole point of a mission statement in a company. That's how it should work. It should be a filter, should be guardrails for where your business is headed. So we're constantly talking about products we believe in and these types of things. So I will have my viewpoint, Rachel will have her viewpoint, Drew might have his viewpoint, and others will have theirs. We'll hash it all out. And then ultimately, at least in our current process, Rachel is the decider on what we carry, what we don't, and what we decide to drop in these types of things with wise counsel from everybody else. So honestly, it's not even, obviously if I'm like, Rachel, we should definitely carry this, then she'll be like, okay, I trust you, and we'll carry it. But, ultimately we've all empowered her to be the final decision maker, because you kind of need like one final decision maker for these types of things. So if I, Rachel, whoever, really can't stand behind a product, we'll either not carry it in the first place, or once we discover, get your feedback, understand the product better, see how it holds up over time, these types of things, and we decide like, yeah, this product is really not what we were hoping it would be, then we'll drop it, quite frankly. So that's our process. It's not a perfect one. I'm human. We are all humans here. We are all flawed. But that is something that we are always striving towards. And that's part of our process of what we do. So not taking ourselves so seriously that like, if it doesn't have our stamp of approval, it's not a good product. That's not like that at all. There could be a lot of reasons why we don't carry something that is not at all related to our belief in a product or not. It's not that we carry all products that we believe in, and it's not that we are perfect and only carry products that we're 100% behind, because sometimes we miss the mark. But that is something we're constantly striving towards. All right, we're gonna wrap up Q&A just a tad early, not as early as I was originally thinking. I did take my time on that last question, but I thought it was important. So question of the week for this week is, if you could tour any pen factory, behind the scenes, see as much as you want, what would you want to see? And then maybe they're like in a faraway place and you wouldn't actually want to go there. what would you want to see a virtual tour of? Like if you could send me anywhere and I could record it and whatever, what would you want to see? So either way you want to answer that question, where would you like to see a behind the scenes tour in the pen world? Go ahead and leave that comment here in Q&A and I would love to read that. You can take a look at a bunch of the pens that I talked about here today on gouletpens.com. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because that makes us happy and it shares our video with more people because YouTube likes to share things that you all enjoy and engage in. That's how this whole process works. Hope you have a fantastic weekend. I really do. I'll see you next time for Q&A. Thanks so much for watching and right on.